Welcome back to Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Jenny Blake, a licensed nutritionist, and I'm here with Rick Alexander, your more regular host. And today he's going to share everything he knows about running ultramarathons. So, hey Rick, how's it going?
Good. Yeah, so I think, we just today, actually, the day that we're recording this, we just released our first on the how-to series. And I'm super excited about this because if there's anything, if we have a niche with Lionheart Radio, it's the fact that we actually don't have a niche. And I'm really excited because we are constantly reaching out to every different spectrum of the active lifestyle and trying to interview them and try to like extract some of their success tips and also like just how they go about things. And a lot of people have been writing in because they're excited with the guests that we get, but they also want to like get involved in this stuff. I know one of our listeners, right after I released my episode recapping the Tahoe 200, they were like, oh, now I really want to run an ultra marathon, which I don't know why that one would make you want to run an ultra, but I guess it did. So this will be the second part of our how-to series.
Nice. So it's going to be all about ultra marathons. Is that how you even call them?
Yeah, exactly. Anything over a standard marathon distance is an ultra marathon.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you want to run an ultra, the very first thing you have to do is get used to the fact that people are going to ask you why the hell you want to run an ultra.
That was going to be my first question.
Really?
Well, more so, like, before we get into it, let's just say why you want to do it and maybe some of the big benefits. Because if you're anything like me, you might listen to the first 2 minutes and be like, I am never going to run an ultra. I'm just going to go ahead and skip to the next one. So maybe you can shine some light on what, maybe some benefits you might not even think of. Just really quick, I'm sure we'll get into more of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult thing. I think everybody has their own reason on why they want to run ultra, and everybody's is typically different. A lot of people just really like to challenge. I mean, even in the middle of the Tahoe 200, I remember this guy that I'd been running with all night was like, Rick, why do we do these? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'll be able to tell you when it's over. And that's kind of the way it goes. But I'll tell you what some of my favorite parts about the ultramarathon community are. And honestly, community is my favorite part of the whole thing. Like when you suffer like that with somebody, which CrossFitters can attest to, it's like that on steroids, right? It's that experience of suffering out in the wilderness with somebody. Everybody has this like kinship and everybody's like really diehard and they want to help you, because even if their race doesn't go well, you'll see people stick around and like crew at aid stations and try to help other people because they just know that effort. And then obviously, just like any other sport, there's a lot of things that can be translated to regular life. When you're out there and you're persevering for so long, like there's a lot of life lessons that kind of can translate from an experience like that.
Yeah, I think you kind of dove into that on the other episode of it really brings you down to your core self.
Yeah, right, exactly. And as you do it, like, I mean, for me, I read the book Ultramarathon Man with Dean Karnazes, and just the way he described that like outer body experience of just pushing yourself so much further than most people can even comprehend. It takes a certain person for that experience to speak to, but if you're one of those people, I think you probably already know it because somewhere deep down you thought, man, I want to try something like that.
And then probably a big benefit afterwards is not only do you get to say you do it, but you get to be that person who thinks, man, I just ran that far. Like, not a lot of people do that, and I can do that. I can probably do a lot of other things that I haven't marked off the list yet. Yeah,
and that's the best part, right? Once you do it, you're like, oh God, like what else could I be capable of? And that has been a never-ending Pandora's box for me.
And so how many have you done so far?
I've ran 10.
10?
Well, I ran 10 this year, so I ran 12 total.
Okay, so 10 in just this year,
yeah.
and 12 total.
Yeah, that's right.
Nice. And so what was, how'd you start this? Did you just sign up for one, or how do you even get into this?
Right. So ultrasignup.com is by far the best resource for ultramarathons. This year there was like a little bit of drama where people were starting to pull their race from UltraSignup and they were starting to like host it themselves. But by and large, I mean, that's how I go find races. You go into ultrasignup.com, you put your state, and then you can sort it by like 200 miles within your zip code, and it'll tell you every ultra that's taking place around you. And that's probably the best way to start. What I did, which I do not recommend for people, is I signed up for a 50 miler and I just ran it without any training experience. And I talked about that in the opening couple sections of my book, but like I didn't train at all. I just picked it. And for me, that experience had nothing to do with anything other than just proving to myself that I could do it. And it's a whole different esoteric conversation we don't have to have. But but yeah, so the first thing you need to do, just like when we talked about bodybuilding, you need to pick a show, you know, or at least know. Maybe you don't sign up right away, but you pick one that you're going to start prepping for. You need to do that with a ultramarathon. And just like in bodybuilding, we have to pick bikini, figure, bodybuilding. You need to pick a distance, because ultramarathon, all that means is anything longer than 26.2 miles. Okay. So a 50K is an ultramarathon, and that's 31 miles. And that's going to be a lot different than the 200 miler that I just ran, right? So it's typically 50K, 50 miler, 100K, 100 miler. Those are the standard distances, those four. Okay,
and so you did 50 miler, and then you went to 100 miler, and then you just jumped to 200 miles?
Also, what I did personally is I ran the 50 miler, had success, didn't run again for a couple years.
Okay.
Right, and then I signed up for the 100 miler, tried to do that exact same thing where I didn't train, only instead of 50 miles in North Carolina with 7,000 feet of climbing, it was 100 miles in Santa Barbara with 40,000 or 30,000 feet of climbing. Did not go well for me, but it went well enough that I got bit by the bug, and then I signed up. But I basically went from 100K to 200 miles. That was the jump I made. Again, don't recommend that.
Are there different classes, too, that you sign up?
There's not, no. Okay. I mean, no, there's going to be elite runners, but that's kind of one of the cool things about it is, like, I'm out there running with, like, elite ultramarathon runners, right? And, see, it's kind of crazy because I ran a 50K with a big pro class in it earlier this year, and it was out and back, so you ran out for like 16 miles and came back for 16 miles. And man, when that pro class was coming back, it was like running the opposite way on fucking oncoming traffic, like running down the middle of a highway. It was crazy. But yes, you have to pick a distance, and I recommend picking the 50-mile distance. That's my thing, because a 50K, yes, it's an ultramarathon. I have no problem with people picking that as their first race. But it's only 5 miles longer than a marathon. So you might as well go for it. And a lot of people, they finish a marathon and they're like, yeah, I could run 5 more miles, especially if you trained for it, right? Yeah. And I recommend training about 6 months depending on where your current physical level is. If you're just an active person, in 6 months, you can absolutely get ready for a 50 miler. Okay. For sure. What about the course? How do you decide the course? They're probably all over the United States and outside. Yeah, and you know, I live in Virginia Beach, which is flat, and I signed up for a race in Tahoe, which is not even close to flat. And that was a significant thing that I had to overcome. And in my recap, I talk about how, you know, I got high altitude pulmonary edema and all of these things. Well, that's going to happen if you try to run in an area that is so much different than where you train. So personally, like I said, when you go on Ultra Sign Up, put your zip code in, and then you can pick a race that's within your area code, zip code. And then you know, okay, well, I can plan, even on the weekends, if it's a little hillier than where you live, you can drive out and you can try to get some hills that are going to be similar. Gotcha. So are they generally dirt paths or are they on the roads, pavement? Yeah, I recommend dirt typically because it keeps you in the woods, so it'll be shielded from the sun a little bit more. That's a good point. I've ran one on the road, and all of mine, I ran 100K that was on the road. And because it was on the road, it was like 90 that day. The sun was beating on me all day. I mean, my legs got really banged up from just smashing on the road, which is a lot different than trail. It's a lot less forgiving. Your first one, and then also, too, there's the scenery aspect. If you're running on trail, it's going to be a lot more interesting to look at. Yep. Typically. Yeah, that makes sense. What about the time of the year? I'm sure weather plays a factor, but... Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, beginning and end of summer are typically really good ultra times. So September, October timeframe, and then on the flip side of that, getting in the springtime because you get those cool mornings, and it doesn't get too hot in the middle of the day, depending on where you are at the country. I mean, sometimes you can't avoid it. But by and large, those are the two times that I recommend. Like, I mean, I did a race on December 16th last year. It was 100K. The trail was completely iced over. So it was like the insides of my legs were burning from slipping the whole time. It was like, okay, I just ran a full 26 miles on an ice rink is what it felt like. It's not like you can train for that unless you go run at an ice rink. Right. and it was snowing. I mean, it just adds such an element since we're talking about getting into the sport of ultramarathoning. I would set up as many favorable parts of the environment as you can because on race day, you know, everybody's got a plan to get punched in the face, and that's exactly what's going to happen. So try to set up as much as you can in your favor, which is signing up for a race that's within your areas, signing up at a decent part of the year where I've seen people stick to that and have pretty good success. Our buddy Brendan, he did that 50 miler. That's what he did. He did it in spring, and he did it where he was, so he could go there and train on the weekends.
Have enough time to train, map it out a little bit.
Yep, exactly. He did it in 6 months, and he didn't run that much beforehand, right? Like maybe once or twice a week. I don't even think that.
Yeah.
And he was successful, so.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so once you decide a race, then do you put together the training program that kind of maps to that race, or what does that look like? Yeah,
of course. So depending on how much time that you have, that's when you can start like kind of reverse engineering the training process.
Okay, and do you do that, or do people have coaches who do that, or what do you recommend?
People have coaches. I do handle most of my own training. However, I consult with people. Okay. And one of the advantages that we have with the podcast is obviously that I'm talking to ultramarathoners all the time. Mm-hmm. So like really top level. So I kind of ask them my personal training questions.
Just slide that question in here and there.
Yeah. So hypothetically, say you were 4 months out from 100-miler and
you're this high, weigh this much.
Yeah. So I do a lot of that, but I mean, there's a lot of resources that you can get online, and we'll link some of those up in the show notes. But what I do is I reverse engineer the problem. Okay, so if I'm 6 months out from a 100-miler, the first thing I do is look at, in a typical training program, most people know you're not going to run the actual distance of the race in training. Marathon or higher, that's typical. So your typical marathon program, you're going to go like 22 miles, 20 or 22. Okay. So I try to take that percentage and I apply it to
the longer distance.
Yep. And then even so let's say I'm doing a 100-miler and I want to get like a 60-mile training day or a 50-mile training day. Mm-hmm. That's pretty standard, 40, 50 actually, usually not 60 for that long. But that doesn't mean you have to go out and run 40 miles either. That means you go out and you run 20 miles, and then later in the day you do another 20. Because at the end of the day, ultramarathons really come down to time on your feet more than they do running. Because what people don't understand is when you're running ultra, typically people hike the hills, right? So you run the flats and the downs and you hike the ups. That's a pretty standard game plan. Okay. And early, when people first do ultras, they take off way too fast. That's like very typical. I did the exact same thing. But yeah, so that's how I break down the training. And then also, you can get a lot from cross training when it comes to an ultra, because a lot of times if you're someone that doesn't run a lot and you're going to try to work up to a 100-miler, it's going to beat the hell out of your body. It's going to beat the hell out of your knees and your joints, especially depending on how your mechanics are. So the best thing to do is to start mixing it up with biking. They say biking is a 3-to-1. So for every 3 miles you bike, it's equivalent to 1 running. So I try to use that to my advantage. So I know, okay, I need to get a 40-mile day in. Well, I might bike 40 of those miles, right? Which is going to take off a third of my distance that I have to do that day.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it's not an exact science, but it works.
Yeah. What about strength training? Do you add that in too?
I do. I love strength training. One thing I found is while you're getting ready for an ultra marathon, you're not going to be able to. Some people are. I couldn't get stronger. I wished I could, and I really tried, but I just kept overtraining. Yep. So I had to decide, like, okay, I'm at a point where if being good at ultra is what I want to do, which if that's going to be your goal, then that's kind of the decision you got to make. Switch your strength training to do nothing but support that. Don't try to get stronger in that time frame. You're not going to lose a ton of strength in 6 months if you're still strength training throughout that process. Inherently, by running that much, you are going to lose some. But yeah, so strength training, I do a lot of step-up stuff, a lot of bilateral stuff. So if you think about running, you're only 1 foot at a time, right? Yep. So it doesn't make sense necessarily. Like squats are good, single-legged squats are better, right? What I did is a lot of front rack step-up stuff. Okay. Because that way I'm loaded in my core and I'm building that core, which is going to strengthen the posterior chain, but you're also getting that bilateral step motion, which is going to be huge. Okay, so what does a typical week look like? So you got the strength training, you've got the running, maybe some biking in there. How many days a week is this? And then how do you layer in each of those? So what I would do is I tried to run about 3 days a week. I would use the weekends for my really long runs. Makes sense. What most people do, Saturday and Sunday. So for the 200-mile distance, I had to spend Saturday and Sunday a few times running all weekend, kind of. But individual results may vary. So through the week, though, I would run only like once or twice, and I would strength train like twice. At first, I was strength training like 4 or 5 days a week. But like I said, I just started running into overtraining. And what I did is I started taking movements that would benefit me running. So when you're running downhill, people don't realize this. They always regret or dread the uphills, but it's the downhills that are really going to beat your ass, because what happens is you fry your posterior chain from going up, and now you don't have that support coming down, so all that is landing on your knees and on your quads, and over time those things are just going to get banged up, and your toes are going to be smashed in the front of your shoes. Jeez. So over time the downhills like really end up being the ones that beat you up. So that being said, what is downhill? It's deceleration. So I did a lot of not just box jumps, but box jump overs. Right?
Yeah.
Because box jumps wouldn't make sense because you're not going to be coming back down the hill backwards, right? So I really tried to like break it down to look at like what is going to benefit me with direct crossover. Box jump overs for sure.
So as you get closer to the race, you do taper up the run and taper down the strength training?
I didn't, because like I said, once I realized, okay, I'm only strength training 2 or 3 days a week max.
Yeah, it was more maintenance anyway.
It was maintenance anyway, yeah. There wasn't I tried. My gauge was if I'm sore from strength training, then that's a problem. Yeah. You know, if I went, that means I went too hard.
Okay. So as far as, that probably helps you with injury prevention too, I imagine. But how is it training so much and putting so many miles in and time in? Do you get injuries? And how would you even deal with that when you know you got to put in miles? Yeah, people do. People do get injuries. The way that you put in miles without getting injured is you walk a lot. You fast pack or you hike. That's what I did. Okay. Because it's daunting to be like, dude, I got to run 60 miles today. That's daunting. Yeah. But I would sign up, and the reason I ran 10 ultras is because I use those as training races throughout the year. They were like my B races for my Tahoe being my A race. Yeah. And I knew on my own I'm not going to go run 50 miles. So if I signed up, it like held me to it. And so you can do that with half marathons and marathons getting ready for a 50 miler. And in fact, I suggest you do, because even if you're not training as much as you want to be, it will ensure that you get the miles on that day. Yeah. And I literally think that's the most important, because I would go for a couple weeks and be like, oh God, I have only gotten like 30 miles in, you know what I mean, in the last like 2 weeks. Would you always train outside, or would you ever be on a treadmill? I could imagine that's even more daunting. Well, I tried training on a treadmill, and I just found it so much different. It changes your mechanics in your stride. It was frying my posterior chain way more, and I'm like, I didn't feel like I was getting anything out of it. Now, you mentioned like overuse injuries, and I think that happens to a lot of people when they start running, and that's because they're running in shit like Asics and Adidas. Like, I'm being serious. Yeah. Like the running shoe industry has done more for people, like problems for people's knees than anything. So what I tell people, and I've had really, really good luck with this, is to train in a shoe with zero heel drop. So what that means is your heel to your toe has no slope, right? Doesn't have to be the Vibram 5-finger kook shoes that you see running around, but it just needs to be a shoe without a ton of heel. Every millimeter of heel adds like 15% of pressure to the front to your patella. So that's like a rule of thumb. So, you know, when you have these shoes like Asics have 7 millimeters of heel drop, that's a shitload of percentage extra pressure on your patella. So yeah, over time, 60 miles, for sure, you're going to have some knee problems. So what shoes do you wear? Ultra. Altra. Okay. Yeah, the brand is Ultra. They're one of the biggest brands in ultramarathoning, and I'm not even endorsed by them, but I'll never wear anything else. I mean, it's literally, I've recommended them to people with knee injuries, and we've cleaned up their knee injuries, because running with a zero heel drop, it just forces you to hit that midfoot, how your shoe really should be hitting the ground. And another book is called Chi Running. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. That did a lot to change up my mechanics. Of course, Born to Run is one of the big ones, but Chi Running, he really talks about the midfoot strike and just gives you different mental cues while you run. Okay. Yeah, you can probably tell I'm not a runner at all, so I'm going to be asking all the basics questions, which might relate to somebody who's like, ooh, I kind of want to get into running and see where it goes. Yeah. But, so shoes, that's important. That's good to know. Any other, like, gear while you're training that you're like, ooh, I had to have these, or tips like that? Yeah, so that's the thing about having a good training cycle, is you want to test all of your gear. Okay. So go out and do your long runs with the gear that you think you're going to be wearing. So Ultimate Direction makes a really good pack that you can put on. The big thing with ultramarathoning, and at the end we'll go over some things to bring with you in your pack when you're actually doing the ultra. Okay. But I say to do I did full dress rehearsals for the Tahoe. Got that. full dress rehearsals for the Tahoe 200, and
it really saved me because I realized like, oh fuck, I can't fit as much as I thought I could in my pack. So
or even the weight on your back.
Yeah, and how that feels too, and how that feels. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point. So
you shouldn't be too much weight on your back though. Like everything's pretty lightweight.
10 pounds, 15, 20, what are we?
No, shit, no. Like, no, like 2 pounds maybe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
A couple pounds, yeah.
Even including water?
And just whatever your water weighs. Like, everything should be pretty lightweight. A lot of people do a camelback. I only did a camelback for the 200. Any load, 100 miles or under, and I don't do a camelback. I like the packs that have your water on the front. It looks like a harness, and they hold your water in the front. That it's just really convenient. You don't want to be like taking your bag off and stuff at every aid station, and we can get into that. But yeah, I've just found keeping everything in front, and then Advil and all the things you need up front, it makes it way less seamless because it doesn't seem like taking your backpack off is a lot of effort. 40 miles into your first ultramarathon, it is a ton of effort.
Oh yeah,
like mind melting.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
So what else do you do for training? So there's the obviously the running, the strength training. What about, is there nutrition, or is there anything else that we're missing?
No, I guess the other good thing about training is use your really long runs to figure out what nutrition works for you.
Okay.
Unfortunately, your long runs might not be long enough to really see how you react. So a big part of running a successful ultramarathon is managing all the little things that can go wrong over the course of a long period of time. And your gut is one of those things. So while you're running, you can, you'll realize like all of a sudden foods that you used to love, you just can't even take a bite of. For me, I've realized soft foods are the way to go because like donuts, stuff like that like you don't have to spend a lot of energy chewing.
Bananas?
Bananas, potatoes dipped in salt are amazing.
Okay.
There's some like pretty standard ultra foods that are at almost every aid station.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say mess with those, but you really aren't going to get a good idea until you get really
start doing it.
Yeah.
So what happens when you're out there and you're like, I gotta shit?
Oh, you gotta shit? That's it?
Where do you go? What do you do? Or even have pee? Do you stop? Or are people like competitive where you keep going? Or even your training?
No. So one of the things with ultras, and this is something that I had to get my mind around, is that you are not running a 5K. You have time. Yeah. You've got a lot of time. If you need a shit, you should stop and take a shit. If you have a rock in your shoe, you should stop on the side of the trail wherever you are, and you should take that rock out because over a long period of time, that rock is going to become a blister, or it's going to become a sore knee, and that's going to become a sore hip, and that's going to become a limp, which is going to cause all kinds of things to go wrong. Yep. I mean, I've literally had a little pebble unravel my whole race before. So back to your original question, stop and take a dump. Here's the only thing, though. I always run with a pack of baby wipes on me. Almost every runner does. Huge mistake that I made. And I'm going to tell you this, and it's going to save you so much heartache. Okay. Get alcohol-free baby wipes. For the love of God, do not get alcohol. So on the very first race that I ran, or the second, the 100-miler, I hit a point where I had been taking salt all day to keep my legs from cramping. And it was like 120 degrees in this canyon. And all of a sudden I hit a point where my guts completely let go. And I couldn't even move more than a foot. Like literally a step without either shitting or puking. Oh. And it was the lowest I've ever been. But what made it so much worse was the fact that I was chafed out of my mind. And the only thing that I had was alcohol, like infused baby wipes. Gosh.
Everyone ready to sign up now?
Yeah. So it was like, let me add just pure fire to this already huge problem.
So that probably goes back to when you train with the nutrition that you're going to have on race day, because something like that might have helped prevent some of that issue.
Yep, for sure.
And so what if you're training outside and, you're in the middle of the woods, right? You just go right there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, you're just going to have to get used to getting uncomfortable. I promise you. Yeah.
It's part of it.
It's going to be part of it.
Nice. So back to the nutrition a little bit. So we talked about, being consistent with what you're going to actually have on race day. But what about, like, is there a standard diet? Like, want to say that you were in ketosis or maybe did keto for it. I think that's pretty standard for some of these ultra runners.
Keto's growing. Zach Bitter, the fastest 100-mile distance in America, or 100-miler in America, runs on a completely ketogenic diet. I will say overall, I don't think it's the majority. Mm-hmm. What I do is I limit carbs going into races because it makes me more fuel efficient when I use them during the race.
Yep.
So what I found is if I don't limit carbs going into a race, the main problem that I have is that when I take them, my blood sugar will spike and I'll get a lot of energy and then I'll crash really fast.
Yep.
And I end up having to take so much more fuel in, which is going to cause more digestion issues over time. So what I do is I limit carbs. Like I try to do it like 4 weeks out.
Okay.
And that way my body just processes them really efficient. I'm not necessarily ketosis. I'm still using them in my runs. I was earlier in the year. But I kind of just switched because it wasn't that practical for me to do it long term.
Yeah.
So I just go really low carb. I just use them as needed. And that's a good idea. And that's a good idea to do for your caffeine as well.
Oh, good point.
Yeah. So I've had ultras where I was working around the clock prior to the ultra. Mm-hmm. And so I was relying on 2, 3, 5 cups of coffee a day. And then in the ultra, when I needed the caffeine, it wasn't there for me. So going into a race, same thing. A few weeks beforehand, I go down to like 1 cup a day max.
Oh, that's a really good point that people probably aren't thinking of.
Yeah, and same thing with Advil. If you're someone that uses a painkiller, Advil, Tylenol a lot, going into the race, limit consumption. That way, it's there for you when you need it. Because there's nothing worse than needing a painkiller and having it not kill pain, or needing energy and having it not provide energy.
Yeah, it's almost like the boy or girl who cried wolf. It's like, nope, you've used this too many times. Mm-mm.
That's right. Your body knows. It's like, no, we don't.
We're on to you.
Yeah.
So are there any, do you do anything special with water intake during training or leading up to it?
No. I like Noon tablets. Everybody's got their own thing. But it's important that you need to get your electrolytes. One thing I would say when you're doing your race, and I've had a problem with really hot races. I've had 2 really hot days when I raced, and I ended up over consuming water without electrolytes, which flushes all of your cells out. Mm-hmm. And then it felt like I was dehydrated, but I wasn't. And it just became it was like a really hard problem to manage.
So you just kept drinking water, and then you were just
right. I just kept feeling more dehydrated, so I kept drinking more water. And at the all along, water wasn't really the problem. I was just flushing my cells out of all their electrolytes. All that interstitial fluid was just getting flushed out. And then I ran into like muscle cramps and all kinds of shit. So
gotcha. Any other supplements that you take during training or actual game day?
So salt tablets are really good. They, like salt sticks, salt licks, whatever they're called. Mm-hmm. And then Tums. People don't know about Tums. Tums is magic. So Tums is really high in magnesium and calcium. Okay. So when you start cramping, even if you have I've been full leg lockup before, eaten like 6 Tums and gotten out of it.
Jeez.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I just told that story about the salt. So mixing it up with Tums is going to keep, if you just go too much salt all race long, you're going to shit your pants. So what I do is I kind of mix it up. So now that I'm more conditioned, I don't really lock up as much.
I was going to say, let's go back to the lockup.
Yeah.
What makes you lock up? And is that usually during a certain time of the race? Is it different for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, technically, it's an electrolyte imbalance, I think, that causes a cramp. But it's from being deconditioned at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So, my first 50-miler, I've had, full lockups where I had to move each of my legs for, maybe 20 minutes with my hands.
Gee, I can only imagine.
Literally locked up. And I don't think that's super common, but I do know people that it happens to.
I was just creeping on your Instagram, and you were going over some rope, and you were like, yep, a girl just locked up and fell in the water over this tightrope.
Did. And that was brutal because it was freezing cold, and we had this, tightrope over a river, and we had to go over it 17 times throughout the course of this race. And she literally, locked up. And fell in, and she was a diabetic, and so she had this electronic thing that monitored her blood sugar. So she was freaking out it was a fucking mess. But
I can't wait to get into the good stories and the benefits of it. But for now, we'll keep going.
You know what? We just had a guy, and we haven't aired this. It might have aired by the time this episode released. Colin O'Brady, who summited the 7 summits, and he did what's called the Explorers Grand Slam, where you summit each of the continent's highest summits, and you go to the North and South Pole. He set 2 world records along the way.
Dang.
And he was like, you know what? You and me, we understand type 2 fun. And I was like, dude, that's perfect. That means it's, while you're in it, you're like, God damn it. Why do I do this? This is fucking miserable. And then as soon as it's over, you start looking back on it with nostalgia. Then a week later, you're like, oh, that was awesome. And then, same thing happened to me with this 200. Like 2-3 days after, I'm like talking to Julie. I'm like, I don't know.
So it's almost like you're
I don't do that anymore.
Addicted to the achievement and the accomplishment, and kind of like you said, during it, you're like, why the hell are we doing this?
Yeah, and then you have those ups and downs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like the whole time you're like, fuck this. I mean, if it were like that, I would say it's not the sport for you.
Yeah.
One thing about that though is when you race, I wrote an article for Ultrarunner magazine. And one of my main points in it was you need to manage your highs and your lows. Mm-hmm. So when you're low, that's a time where people quit, right? If they don't ever get out of that low. So when you're low, you have to manage your headspace. You have to just tell yourself I'm just in a low and I know that it'll come back, right? I know that the high will come back and it always will. You'll always bounce back.
Yep.
So at that point, it's just about forward progress. No matter what your pace falls to, no matter what, just know it'll fade. You just need to get through it. Then when you manage the highs, with that, what happens there, especially if you find yourself doing an ultramarathon when you run all night, coming into the next day, because you're so tired at 3-4 in the morning, when that sun comes up the next day, you find yourself getting a huge runner's high. Happens every ultramarathon. And then what happens is for my first, that 100 mile I was running, sun came up, all of a sudden I felt good. And I charged hard for 10 miles and I killed myself. I just didn't manage that high at all. And so I ran myself out of it way too early. Whereas I could have probably made it last half of the day.
So can you train for that? Do you train maybe on no sleep? Or how do you train for these longer runs where you're not getting as much sleep? Or maybe you're just getting a couple hours here and there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the science is kind of split on whether you can train, whether training sleep deprivation actually does any good for you.
Okay.
But the reason I do it is I like to know how my body reacts. I like to know how mentally I react.
Yeah. I feel like that would be a huge benefit of it.
Yeah, I think the most beneficial training day that I had for the Tahoe 200 was, and I luckily I just stacked 2 events. I got up at 5 in the morning and I ran a 50K.
Okay. And
then I drove up to DC, which was 3 hours, and I did an all night 50K ruck march, basically. It was a fundraiser, but so what I got is I got 60 miles in that day, but more importantly, I got 24 hours on my feet and awake.
Did you sleep at all or nap at all during that?
No, purposely I didn't.
Yeah, because you were testing out.
Yeah, and the ruck march started 9 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. So I like to know how I react, and I tell people, even clients that I've helped work with in the past, and even when I was an instructor for people going through selection, I tell people dude, when you're training, that's the time to figure stuff out, not in the race. So stomp on the gas in training. See what happens when the wheels come off. See what it feels like when you really start falling apart.
Yeah, that's a really good point that people probably don't think about until it's too late, or until they're in it, in the race and realizing, hey, this is not a good food to eat.
Right.
And damn it, I wish I would
right. So
little things like that.
Yeah, utilize training to figure out everything about yourself as much as you can, because figuring that shit out and, in the competition's that's one of the good things about competition. It forces you to face a bunch of things that you might not have to any other way. Mm-hmm. But I personally am a fan of figuring out as much about yourself in training as possible.
So one thing, we're talking about training a lot. Obviously, you got to put in a lot of miles, and that's a lot of time. Whereas a lot of other sports are maybe, an hour training session here, or maybe 2 days, 3 days. But that still, I feel like, doesn't equate to the amount of time you have to put in when it comes to these long distance.
Right.
So how does that get balanced with, working full time or running a business, or people have families, different things like that?
Truthfully, I think that's one of the things that ultramarathoners pride themselves on. Mm-hmm. I just found, I think that people think, for me, I know, we run this business, and then I'm in the military full time. So yeah, I'm not an elite athlete. That's the best part about finishing that Tahoe 200 wasn't just because I just ran 200 miles. Mm-hmm. It was because I just put a whole year of work in, and money and time, and getting sacrificing. I specifically remember Sunday fun days when people were drinking and I went and ran 15 miles instead. Mm-hmm. All of that just adds to the experience at the end, in my opinion. Yeah. And so, it's going to take time, and that's something you're going to have, because time on your feet it's going to matter.
But it just goes along with.
But you get an experience that people never get.
Yep.
You know, like so few people will understand. Like, I mean, and I'm sure like it's not that much different with bikini and figure, right? Like once you're done, it's like, fuck yeah, I did that. You know.
Yeah, you kind of find out what you're made of, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, yeah, okay, I missed that one party that they have every Sunday, but
right, exactly, yeah.
I did this once in a lifetime.
Good news, Sunday the bar's open.
Yeah.
Like good news when it's all over. If you want to go get drunk with your friends are still drunk.
It's still there.
Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. And so, leading up to actual race, a couple weeks beforehand, is there anything you do differently? Yeah.
So this is actually, I had this written down to talk about. So the taper. So when you go into a race, that's typically when you taper. And all tapering means is maybe you hit your peak weeks and now your mileage is coming down, because obviously when you're in peak mileage for the week, like my longest weeks were like 100 miles. That's a lot of miles on your body. You don't want to go into a race the next race. You want to be peak physical condition for the race. A taper allows you to do that.
Okay.
One problem that I see with people, and I've really helped a few people out with this, is that they taper too early. So maybe 3 weeks out, they like only run once, and then they only run. And it's like, you don't, it's, for most people, if you taper too early, you're just going to feel like heavy once you start running. But where I find going into the taper, all I do is I start replacing my run days with bike days, and or even the elliptical, as not cool as that is. Like just getting movement.
Rollerblading.
Nope, I didn't say that. Did not say that. What happens though is if that's your thing, yeah, rollerblading. But yeah, so just getting that movement though, right? Like keeping your body moving on the taper. So yes, you want to decrease mileage because you want to start like repairing some of your joints. Like you want everything to feel tip top going into the race. However, I've just found that constant movement allows you to still feel loose and feel good going into it. Yeah,
and that makes sense. And do you feel like you keep feeling better and better, so you want to run more? Or at that point, are you so done, you're just like, yes, let's just get to
for me, like, because that's one of the problems that I have is for me, running's like 50% training and 50% therapy.
Yeah.
And so when I start cutting it out for a taper, I'm like, oh, God, I got to. And it's just like now, like I just finished Tahoe and I've run a couple times and my feet have blown back up like watermelons both times. But I'm like, damn it, I don't want to run for training. Just let me do this.
Just let me be who I want to be.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But it's actually, it works to your advantage going into a race, because then you're more like, especially if you've been putting in mileage for 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah,
going into the race, you're hungry. You're like, yeah, let's do this.
Okay, so what do you do during that time? You talked about being therapy. Like, are you just thinking? Is that when I think you mentioned that's when you maybe take some business calls or think of good ideas? Are you listening to podcasts? Or what do you do during that time? I told my mom earlier that I was interviewing you, and she was like, what does he do? What does he think about? And I'm like, yeah, that's a question everyone has. So.
Yeah, for racing or for training?
For training. Both? I mean, both. But, I mean, training, you're putting in, like, more miles in total probably than race day.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of people... use headphones, right? I mean, that's a thing, especially in, like, the marathon and less distance. Mm-hmm. For me, I just personally found if I'm running for a long time, headphones they become annoying as shit, and I just don't want to deal with them.
Yep.
And in fact, you get so tired that, like, you don't want anything extra. Like, for me, like, I don't want to deal with trying to find a song. Like, that's how tired I am. I just want to move forward.
Yep.
So when I train 15 miles or less, maybe I'll use headphones or whatever, and then, that kind of speaks for itself. But, dude, one of the things I like about ultramarathoning is it's the most extreme form of meditation on the planet. Like, I focus on my breathing. I focus on my stride. I have that mental checklist like we talked about on an earlier show.
Yep.
And I'm going through my chin tilt, and I'm going through my hips. Are my knees under my hips? Am I hitting on my midfoot? What am I doing with my arms? And I just focus on that.
So you do that during training, too? That's not just race
For sure.
day.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for sure. And, I mean, literally, like... That's what I like about it. Like, I don't like to take my phone when I run.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm going out for therapy. It's like, I just like to get centered.
Yeah, that is such a meditation. You're like Buddha now after all these miles.
Think so. I am getting kind of fat again, but yeah.
Okay, so that leads us up to actual game day.
Okay.
Well, what about the nutrition? Anything about the nutrition? I know, like, typically you hear... pasta the night before, but clearly we talked about low carbs, so you might do something different.
Yeah, I do. I will do a carb load.
Okay.
I think pasta the night before is extreme for anything. I literally will just, I mean, in the morning it's oatmeal or a bagel or something.
Okay.
Or a waffle or just something. That's when I do my carb. I want energy right there. I don't want my brain waves spiking at night. Like that to me doesn't make any sense. So getting that insulin spike prior to going to bed, it just doesn't work for me. So I do it right there. The only other thing is coconut water. It's such a great source of electrolytes. Pedialyte is really good too. Just stay away from like Gatorade and sugary shit like that people think would be good.
Just dehydrate you.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, and so a lot of these races people have to travel to. So do you go there like a few days to get used to it, to check out the map or the trail or anything?
A lot of people do. I like the adventure of it all.
You're like, oh, where am I today? Yeah. Where did I wake up?
Yeah, no, that's what I do. And I mean, it's crazy because I'll drive to these races in the middle of nowhere in like nowhere, Virginia. And I'll leave after work and I'll drive for 6 hours or 5 hours and I'll get there at 1 a.m. or midnight. And there's like 7 other cars in the parking lot of everybody sleeping in their front seat, just waiting to get up.
Oh, man.
It's like a thing. You'll see that a lot. Or a lot of people will tent out. And on Ultra Sign Up, you'll see a lot of race descriptions. They'll be like, oh, like there's tent space available.
So they kind of give you, like, there's a, like you said, the community sense where they kind of tell you, all right, hey, here's some tips. Here's, this is here, that's here. Here's where you can park. And then is there sign up? Like, is it the morning of is sign up or how does that work?
Oh, then you just check in the morning.
Check in, yeah.
And what I do is most of the races have an area for drop bags.
Okay.
And what a drop bag is where you get to put all of your extra shit. So you get to put your extra food that you might want, just in case aid stations don't have what you want. I like to put in some comfort foods. Like for me, it's powdered donuts and coconut water. I always put those in my drop bags because I know if the aid stations don't have what I want and I'm at a super low, I'll get to my thing at like mile 150 and I'm like, oh, coconut water and donuts.
Look forward to that too.
Yeah, you like look forward to it.
In 50 miles, I get that donut.
Yep, and then extra clothes, and then extra shoes are huge. Like with ultras, they last a long time, but a lot of ultramarathons have river crossings, and so you're gonna get your feet wet, and so you're gonna want to change. I stopped taking my shoes off after like the second day of the 200. And it was like a really terrible decision. When I finally got my shoes off after the race, my feet were fucked. And a lot of people, though, were taking them off throughout the whole thing and like got good foot care going. And I should have, in the future, I'll make that decision better. But yeah, having your shoes in your drop bag is huge.
So for the shoes, I hear that you can only go like 300 miles, or you're supposed to only go 300 miles before you get a new pair. So obviously you're doing more than that through your training. So do you go through multiple pairs of shoes or do you just rotate them? How does that work?
So I think that rule derived from a shitty shoe industry.
Okay.
And what people don't understand is that
marketing scheme.
Yeah, right. I mean, they're trying to sell shoes.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand now is that shoes have evolved so much further than what Nike would have you believe, right? Like Ultra, ALTRA, the brand, they have a wide toe box. So you don't get all the toe blisters like you used to get. My last Ultras, I think they went 1,400 miles before they got a crack in them.
Dang.
Right? I mean, shoes have evolved, and they're much better. And when I put them on at mile 1,400, they were just as comfortable. Actually, the first day I bought them, I put them on and I ran 59 miles.
Jeez.
Day one, no blisters.
So it's more about having the dry pair of shoes, on race day. It's not necessarily that they're going to get worn. Or
right, because when your skin is wet and it's rubbing together for a real long time, it's going to start deteriorating.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you have in your bag?
In your drop bag?
Yeah. What about for chafing?
Yeah, Squirrel's Nut Butter is the best.
I like that name.
I'm wearing it right now.
Just podcasting, gotta put on my nut butter.
Yeah, so I carry that with me. I used to carry Aquaphor. A lot of people do Aquaphor. Okay. So you start getting a hot spot, you can put it there right away. Again, you start getting a hot spot, take care of it right there. Do not let anything go. Don't say to the next aid station. That's what I've done a million times, and I've regretted it a million times. So Squirrel's Nut Butter is good. Anti-chafe cream.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about sunscreen? People think of that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten smoked out there. You would get smoked out there.
Yep.
Aaron would probably be fine. I mean, it just, a lot of them are in the woods. I wear a hat. That's what I do. Because I like to keep the sweat out of my eyes anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got your kind of, what's the gear pack you said again that you kind of have all your stuff on?
Ultimate Direction makes the brand, or it's the brand that makes them. But yeah, it's just like an H harness that you'll see if you just Google Ultramarathon, hit images, you'll see almost all of them wear it.
Okay, so you got your water there, you got like your Advil, you said, some of the foods you want during it.
I'll carry a little bit of food on me. I don't do a lot of gels, like the power gels and sports gels, because they kind of fuck your gut up after a really long period of time.
Okay.
And it's like, if you read those things, they're like, take one every 45 minutes. It's like, what the fuck? Like, that would kill you. So I keep a couple of those. I'm going to be out here
for a long time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's every 45 minutes for 3 days.
Yeah.
No, but I keep a gel on me. I like to keep a Snickers bar on me because that's good for a low. Kind of like whatever your comfort food is, or something you think you might be able to handle. But anything that's crunchy is hard. Like, I've had my jaw lock up when I try to eat a crunchy granola bar. Oh, dang. Just because you get so tired.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then salt, Tums, and I do like a first aid kit with just some, like, blisters, stuff to take care of a blister, stuff to take care of a quick wound, nothing crazy, and then I just vacuum seal it and throw it in my bag. I just keep that in there all the time. I've never even had to open it, but
it's there in case you need it.
It's there in case I need it. Yeah.
All right, so you have all of your stuff. You got your pack. You got your buckets in case at the med stations that you might want.
Aid.
What did I call it?
It's a drop bag, not a bucket.
Bucket.
You just got your bucket of shit and you go to your aid station.
Top it off.
Okay.
So you wake up. You taking care of that. What's the vibe like? What's everyone around you like? Is it friendly? Like, hey man, introducing people? Or
out of 12 ultras, I've slept more than 3 hours on maybe 3 of them. Legitimately, and that's because they were late starts.
Don't talk to me, I'm here.
No, I mean, people are okay, but for whatever reason, and talking to other runners, it's kind of a thing. Like, you just get these jitters, and people don't sleep well the night. Almost nobody sleeps more than 4 hours before these things. And they always have early starts, because you got to think they're so long. So you're doing a 50-miler, it'll be probably a 14-hour cutoff for a 50-miler.
Okay.
So if it starts at 5 a.m., it's going to end at 7 at night. So they got to start early.
What are the general cutoff times for the different distances?
14 hours is probably pretty standard for a 50-miler. Okay. I always shoot for like 12 hours, like a really respectable time. And then for a 100-miler, I think sub 24 hours is pretty elite. 30 hours is more of your like standard 100-mile time. And then if the course is out west, or if it's hilly, maybe not out west, but a lot of them out west are hilly. Yep. Then 36 hours is the standard cutoff for 100.
So, okay, sorry to derail a little bit, but what happens if you're out there in the cutoff time? They're like, all right, everyone pack up, we're heading home?
No, because what happens is there's cutoff times for aid stations.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, say there's 36 hours to meet 100, well, then they're going to reverse engineer that, and they're going to say, okay, most likely you'd have to be at mile 70 by 24 hours or whatever.
Okay.
Yep, and so that's what happened to me at my first 100. I didn't quit, I just got cut off on the time on mile 70.
Gotcha. And I didn't do the math that quick, but what's the average mile for some of these races?
So the thing with ultramarathons is you don't look at it like, what am I running per mile? Because there's so much stopping, there's so much hiking, there's river crossings, there's aid station check-ins, there's eating, there's might be sleeping, you're shitting. Like, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So you're not running a pace. It's not like a marathon where you're like, oh, I ran a 10-minute mile or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
It's like I could tell you what I shoot for, but like that wouldn't help anybody trying to run these things.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the beginning of the day. You've got all your stuff. You wake up. People are kind of in the same boat as you. Haven't really slept that much. Mm-hmm. Is there a starting line and they shoot a gun and you go, or how does that even work?
Yeah, basically, yeah. You go up to the starting line and then they say go, and then you run for 12 hours. One thing I'll say is when you start, just like every race, people take off really fast. Mm-hmm. It took me 8 ultras before I stopped taking off with the front people, right? Like, I'm not a front runner, and I know that. And I'll tell you, like, last February, it was the first time I was running the North Face 50-miler in D.C. And when it took off, the entire race, for whatever reason, that race attracts either elite people trying to run a really good time because it's kind of flat, or newcomers because the North Face has a really big name. Okay. And so they're good, like, first-time races. But those two things combined, the newcomers took off with the elite runners. And it was, like, the first time I had the wherewithal to be like, yeah, I'm not going with you. Like, I know.
You're walking.
Yeah. Like, barely running. I'm like, I know very few people that can keep that pace for 50 miles.
Yeah.
And sure than shit, like, 30 miles in, 40 miles in. I mean, I just started passing. I remember getting to mile 43 at the aid station, and it looked like a war zone. I mean, people are just laid out everywhere, like, just trying to get aid. And I was like, damn. y'all fucked up.
You learned your lesson.
See ya.
So how many people start these races?
It's big. I think it's big for what it is. I mean, 200 people started the 200 miler that I did.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
I mean, they sell out quite often.
Girls and guys too?
Yeah. I mean, lots of girls and lots of guys. And there's like, well,
dogs.
Dogs, cats, dude, worms, there's all kinds of stuff. And yeah, what's crazy is like the big races literally have a lottery. Like you cannot get into the Hurt 100 or Western States or any of the big names now.
So do they qualify you for something else?
A lot of them do. Yeah, a lot of them have qualifiers.
Okay.
Yeah, and then once you qualify, then there's a lottery. So it's like that big.
Jeez, what's the average age you think? I generally think of marathon runners as older.
It is. It's an older sport. And it tends to be, I mean, like I said, with that 200 miler, I ran with a 57-year-old, a 55-year-old, and a 61-year-old.
And
that's crazy.
You're just like, see ya.
Yeah, we finished linking arms.
Holding hands.
We literally all tied.
That's cool though. But that goes back to the community. So you start off and everyone's kind of nervous, haven't slept much, and you get going. Main thing, try to pace yourself.
Yeah.
So are you running with people when you're out there? I imagine it kind of distance yourself out just because of the distance of it. But do you pass by people?
It depends on what the race is like, whether it's an out and back, whether it's a big loop, whether it's a lot of little loops.
Okay.
And, people think like some of my best races have been 12 hours. So, there's like we talked about 50K, 50 mile, the distance races. Mm-hmm. And then there's also time races where you can do a 6-hour race or a 12-hour race or 24 or 48, whatever. I think a 12-hour race is actually a really good place to start for people because if it's a 12-hour race, that means it's a loop, right? Now, if it's a loop, that means you can prep your aid station exactly how you want it. So you can have all your gear there. You don't have to run with a ton of gear. So that's a really good place to start too. That's my best race has been a 12-hour 1K loop. And that's because we got to have everything right there, and I don't have to run with anything but a water bottle, if I even wanted it.
And you mentioned that was kind of your goal time for, I think, the 50 miler maybe? So that gives you an idea of running for that long. Right.
So what I did is I literally divided 50 miles by 12 hours, and I was like, okay, I need to run 7 laps every hour.
Yep.
And every hour, if I chalked by 8 or 9 laps and I felt good, I was like, okay, I'm ahead of schedule. Next hour, I can take a lap off if I need to. Mm-hmm. And you can figure that out. I think that's a really good way to go about it. Probably should have mentioned that at the beginning, but I think that's a really good first race.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you get going, and then how often are the aid stations, and how
I think typical is 6 to 7 miles. I mean, in the description.
That's pretty frequent. More frequent than I thought.
Yeah, but in the Tahoe 200, they were all 20 miles apart, or 23 miles. So you're running marathons between them.
Yeah.
So it all depends. I mean, obviously with 200-mile race, you can't have aid stations every 6 miles.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it just depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So you get going, and then I'm sure some of these races you have help. Do people, cheer you on, know where you're at, or come with you? Yep.
So pick your crew and your pacers wisely. So I just had really good luck having my girlfriend and my friends pace me. Mm-hmm. And the goal of a pacer in an elite runner, you'll see it. So if you run a 100-miler, it'll say okay, pacers can start at mile 60. And with all that means is at mile 60, you can pick up your pacer for as long as you want to.
Okay.
I don't have friends that can pace whole races for me, but they'll pace sections. And the good thing about that is they're pretty fresh. They're not necessarily trying to keep me to a pace more than they're just trying to keep me company and keep my head in the game.
Gotcha.
And keep that good positive self-talk, because it's really easy to get in a negative headspace in an ultramarathon. I found that to be probably the most important thing, is just guarding that headspace. Mm-hmm. And so having good pacers, having a good crew is a good idea. And it's a good idea to write out complete directions for your crew on how to get to every aid station. So there'll be a race packet usually, and you can do that. Be as prepared as possible so that you can set your crew up for success, because you definitely want them there if you're planning on having them there.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about the logistics. You want that taken care of so they can focus
beforehand, of course. Yeah. Especially if you're your first one.
Totally makes sense. And so you said they help you out with the headspace, so I'm sure at some point during this you want to quit, I imagine. Or are you I've trained so hard for this is it, I'm excited to finish? What does that look like?
Yeah, if you look for a reason to quit, you'll find it. Mm-hmm. So at no point do I ever want to quit, and I don't even let myself consider it as an option. I don't go there. It's never a thing.
I think you said for the Tahoe 200, a lot of people finished more so than we thought, and we kind of looked at it, well, if you're signing up for this, you're probably gonna do it. It's not like a half marathon where you're like, let's just see, like, and I think you said it cost a pretty penny, so if you sign up for it, you're gonna
with a race that it was so much of an investment. With 200 miles, it was like $980 to register, and then I had to fly there, and then your pacers have to fly there, and your crew has to fly there, and then you have to get lodging while you're there. So, I mean, that was like a $3,500 trip for me or more. Yeah. So, plus rent a car while you're there.
Not to mention the training that you just put in for 6 months. And...
Yeah, I did 10 ultras leading up, 9 ultras leading up to it. I mean, I wasn't going to quit. I wouldn't even entertain it.
Yep.
And then, of course, I raised a bunch of money for the Heroes Project, which made it that much more gnarly. Yep. And I actually recommend that for people, too. It's like, dude, do your first ultra and then attach some cause behind it that means something to you. You take $3,000 from your friends and family like I did for that cause. Yeah. You're not fucking stopping. Yeah. Right? I mean, just is what it is. Now, in some races, do things happen? Like, yeah, I mean, people get hurt. They get, like, things happen. Yeah. But as far as, like, quitting or not quitting, don't make that an option.
Gotcha.
Finish the race.
So, but people who maybe aren't as headstrong as that, how many people do you think don't finish the race? Or what's the, like, average percentage that finish it?
They're all so different. Whether I mean, a flat 1K loop is going to be a shitload different than a 100-miler in the mountains. So you can, but what's good about Ultra Sign Up is you can look at the year before if it's not the first year of the race, and you can see how many people, didn't make it or whatever.
Yeah, I'll give you an idea of how tough the course is.
I mean, that winter race that I told you about, like, it was 5 a.m, sleeting. There was like over 200 people there, and like, I think like 30% of the people finished. Like, it was super low. Jeez. So it just kind of depends,
Gotcha. Okay, so is there, and we kind of went over all of this, like, where you get, down to your core, and it's just like, just finish it, and you try not to have meltdowns. Yeah. So you get through all of that. Is there anything else you want to mention, or that
post-race?
Okay.
Yeah, so post-race, and we'll keep this kind of quick because we're coming up on the hour mark, but post-race, there's different ways to go about it, but I limit carbs again. And the reason is oxidative stress and reducing inflammation. Yep. Because you're going to find you're really inflamed. Even if you don't look inflamed, like your joints are going to be inflamed, the capsule, like you're going to have a lot of things going on there. So reducing carbohydrates those first like 5 days, 3 days post-race are going to really, not only that, but during the race, you're going to eat so much shit that you maybe weren't eating the whole way leading up to it, so your guts are going to be kind of messed up after that too. So as a rule of thumb, I try to limit out that day, that night, I'll blow it out, whatever you want, Ben & Jerry's, whatever, that's my thing. And then after that, I will limit carbs for a couple days just to kind of reduce stress. And the other thing is, it's going to sound like the worst idea in the world, but if you can get out and go for a run, or if you can jog or walk even, like if it's going to be your first ultra, probably aren't going to run the next day. But even if you're hobbling, just walk, unless you have stress fractures. Walk, that way you can like just get some movement, some blood flow in your joints, and it'll ease the recovery process.
Okay, so, but you'll get stress fractures if you run that much, right?
You can.
Run it. Okay.
I mean, my left foot got pretty stress fractured in that 200.
Okay, and so, and I've seen pictures of your before and after, and kind of heard stories of when you might be falling over and halfway passing out. And so a lot of people may question, just like, other extreme sports, is how healthy is this? Is it healthy to run 200 miles? And what's your take on that?
Yeah, I do. I think so. I think that suffering is linked with longevity. Okay. Dr. Rhonda Patrick talks a lot about that, how like, for whatever reason, people that like do sports that cause them to suffer, like an ultramarathon, it's actually linked to a longer life. And on top of that, I mean, look, my dad is like 57 years old, and he lives a life of not much movement, pretty sedentary, would be the correct way to say that. And I'm running an ultramarathon with a 57-year-old guy that has run, he ran like 4 or 5 just in that year alone, right? He's been running them for years. So I think, and I'm only 30, so I can't really comment on it really. Yep. But when I'm just looking at the facts, I'm like, okay, well, 57 of not moving, 57 of moving your whole life. I'm going to go with it's okay. Now, if you're just beating the hell out of your joints constantly, like you need to clean some stuff up. Like your mechanics need to be clean and stuff like that. But overall, my thing is, I think you're just picking your pain, know? And I've thought about this a lot. Like last year I was, we were at snowboarding. I went down to the bar, And I was talking to a guy there, the bartender, and he literally had to leave in the middle of our conversation. He's like, oh, I got to go take a painkiller. And literally because he was standing behind a bar, but he's been sedentary his entire life. You're not escaping pain no matter what route you take, right? I just pick the pain in the mountains, and I don't have to deal with taking painkillers to stand on my feet behind a bar for 6 fucking hours, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I feel like that's all you're doing. You're just picking your pain. I would rather pick pain on my own terms and then not have to deal with it in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. Into what, you know, people who ask that question, it's just out of the norm, right? So people think you're crazy because it's just out of the norm, but you're like, well, let's flip this around. You're taking painkillers to stand on your feet because you live a normal, I put in quotations, life.
Right.
So it's a good way to think about it that a lot of people probably don't.
Right, because when you're out in the mountains for 200 miles, regular shit is easy. It's not a big deal for you to park at the back of your parking lot and walk into the grocery store. Like I've seen normal people, quote unquote, lose their fucking mind about. Mm-hmm. You're just reframing that reference point of what's hard and what's not. You know, it's like, you know, one of the stories I tell you about in my book, and I heard this from Joe DeSena, the founder of the Spartan Race. He's like, if someone's, you know, how many times have you seen people driving on the road and have to go around a cyclist and just lose their shit? Yeah. Because you had to move your arms 4 inches to the left and 4 inches back to the right. It's like, that's somebody that is in dire need of having their reference point for an uncomfortable reset, right? Because we go through life and everything is so goddamn comfortable, which is why I think personally you're seeing obstacle course racing, CrossFit, ultramarathoning. These things are exploding in the last like 5-10 years. And I think that's because we've become so fucking comfortable as a society. And there's like some part of us, you know, that through evolutionary biology that's just like really needing these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's why people go camping. They have their mansions and they want to go camping
in the woods. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, totally same idea. Sense. So yeah, I think you're picking your pain at that point. Gotcha.
So speaking of pain, you just finished your 200-miler Tahoe race. Mm-hmm. Are you going to do that again, you think? Or what's next? You're going to keep something new?
I don't do the same ultras more than once, actually. A lot of people do. Like, there's people that have run Tahoe 200 every year. For me, running an ultramarathon is so much of an adventure that I value the adventure part of it. And so I'm like, I've already done it. Why would I want to do it again? That's just my outtake. I get why people do them. But for me, I'm like, there's so much more to see. Like, 10 ultras means that I got to see 10 parts of the country in the coolest way possible. So next year, I'd rather see other parts.
Okay, so other parts running an ultra, or you think?
Me personally?
Yeah. Go on.
I'm going to run an Ironman in December. I'm going to do that because I've had it on my bucket list for a little bit. And now that I've put it on this show like 4 times, I fucking definitely have to do it. And then
accountability.
Yeah, and then the other thing, you know, this year is kind of the year of supported events for me. So like all that means is like we had aid stations and we had all these things.
Sign-ups.
Yeah, sign-ups and all this stuff. Yeah. And it's like, next year, what I kind of came to the realization is like, man, adventure is free. Mm-hmm. So like I kind of want to do some unsupported challenges. Like I'm messing with a few different things that I'll probably release later. But yeah, I've kind of like, I feel like I checked that box a little bit. So now I kind of want to move and do some more like just unsupported stuff.
Okay. So people who maybe do one and they're like, okay, I want to do another one. How do they take what they've learned and do they switch their training up? Or is there something you've learned where you're like, if I did do it again, I would make sure I trained this way, or I would have my improvement season to do this before I went back into training hard for it again?
Like I just slid improvement season back in there. And what do you mean? You mean as you, I don't really understand the question.
Okay, so you've completed this 200 miles, right? You're done. Let's say you're going to do it again, or somebody you're giving advice to somebody who's going to do it again. Mm-hmm. Would you now go, okay, I'm going to train the exact same way? Or you're like, ooh, I know I can do this or that.
Yeah, you know what I think? A lot of times in life, people don't spend enough time reflecting on what worked and what didn't. Mm-hmm. We just move into the next thing because it's the next thing, and we have short attention spans now because it's 2017, so we just start doing the next thing. Yep. And I think personally, like, no, like I really, even after this 200, I spent a lot of time. I mean, I did the recap, but I've spent a shitload of time thinking about what worked and what didn't, and I've made notes on it. Like, I mean... And I do that after every race. You know, I did a race earlier in the year, and I talked about this on the recap, so I won't talk about it too long, but I read a book that just put me in kind of a negative headspace. Mm-hmm. I, made a mental note, like, do not fucking do that again. And in fact, do the opposite of that. So before Tahoe, I read a book that was like literally the whole purpose of that book was geared toward putting people in a positive headspace. And the difference it made was astounding.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of what I was talking about.
So I try to make a mental checklist of everything that worked and everything that didn't work. And anytime I got really uncomfortable during the race, I try to figure out why and see if it was something I could do about it or whether it's just more training or conditioning. So I'm always trying to evolve in everything I do. So
gotcha. And I think that's probably good advice for everyone. Is there maybe one thing that you want to leave everybody with that's the most important thing, like during the training or headspace or what mental, aspect? What is that?
Is this kicker? Are we doing the kicker kind of right now? What I think is don't, like I mentioned it earlier in the show, but I can't emphasize it enough. Don't be afraid to utilize other movement modalities in order to get to your desired end result. Okay. Do not think like, okay, if I want to run 100 milers, I have to do nothing but run up until that point, and then you get hurt and you get frustrated and you get pissed off. Like take a step back, look at it in the most practical way possible, and look at all of the movements that might help you in your running endeavors. And that's what I did. It's like you don't need a master's in strength and conditioning to know that step ups are going to mimic a running movement. You don't need to know that you need to work on deceleration when you come down hills. You don't need to know that riding a bike is probably going to be it's a Google search, right? Like you can figure this stuff out. And so the barrier to entry for an ultramarathon is not that high. Like it's going to cost you some money to enter, maybe $80-$100, whatever that is, pretty standard. And the shoes are expensive, and I think you should splurge on shoes. The first 100 miler, I ran in a pair of $60 New Balances, and my feet got the shit kicked out of them. So splurge on things that matter, like shoes, in your gear. But other than that, it's time. And in fact, like I found throughout the year, I actually saved a lot of money because races are on Saturday. So Friday night, I was sleeping in my car waiting for a race. Like I wasn't going out. And then after the race at 10 o'clock on Saturday night, I was not going to meet my friends because my shit hurt. So I was going to sleep. You know what I mean? And then on Sunday Fun Day, I was either sore or recovering or training. So overall, like the lifestyle benefit was pretty impactful in a positive way.
And so now you can take that, everything you've learned and apply it to your day-to-day or whatever, the Ironman that you're going to do or any other adventure that you...
Oh, without a doubt. And I'm like a huge proponent of that. Like, what can I learn from what I just did to transcend and do what I'm going to do next?
Nice. That's awesome. So we've learned a lot about ultras, and I think people who maybe are just going to do their first 5K can take something out of that.
For sure.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, sweet. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track and delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LuaVive.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest.